Welcome to the Actual Astronomy Podcast, episode 20, Objects to Observe in June 2020. How are you this afternoon, Shane?
I am pretty good. How about yourself?
Well, we're doing good here, just having a few technical problems, but I think we'll probably get those sorted out later this week. So we're just going to do one podcast this week and then be back to the usual of doing two a week next week. Sound good?
Sounds good. And I think this is episode 18.
Oh, is it episode 18?
Yeah.
My apologies. I'm
No worries. No worries.
Don't worry about editing that.
Okay, it stays.
Yeah, this is sort of the prairie one, so slightly out of sequence in our order. I was just reading my subject notes, but thank you very much for the correction.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe we'll talk about a few astronomical terms to get started on this sort of what's up in the sky for June 2020. So one thing that you and I are going through right now is this business of perpetual twilight.
Oh, yes. The astronomers, I don't know, kind of dark moments, but not really dark. Dark because we can't observe.
So we, I think it was on my first or second year here, we went out to a spot and had a good look at it because I'd never seen it before, being from further southern reaches. And I guess once you get much above 47 degrees north latitude, you'll start to get nights or even around midnight where it's not completely dark and you actually see almost like the last little bit of sunset on the distant horizon. You can get up to a high point. And I remember that night was in like June, like I said, 7 or 8 years ago. And you could actually see the sun set in the west. And then there was like that little bit of glow, that little last bit of sunset, just a small amount. And then it started moving from the west to the northwest, right to the north, and then back across into the northeast. It was really something to see. But of course, once you get too far into June, it means that it doesn't really get dark at all anymore.
Yeah. So, typically for the month of June, we don't travel too far for dark skies because we can't get dark skies at this time. But that doesn't mean that there isn't things to look at or observe.
Yeah, no, that's right. So one of the first things we have coming up is the inferior conjunction of Venus, which is going to be on the 3rd. And so that's when Venus is more or less right beside the sun and then in the daytime sky. And so, of course, it's not visible during the evening. But what's happening here is we're transitioning from Venus being an observable planet in the evening sky to being an observable planet over the next several months, starting in July and being well observable into October, November timeframe. So I'm looking forward to getting up and getting some of those observations coming.
Yeah. So how early would Venus be visible, I guess, in the mornings during that time?
Well, the neat part about that is, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm being hard on you, but I don't think you like to get up in the morning as much as I do and observe. Is that a fair comment?
That's a fair comment. Once I go to bed, I like to stay there until it's, wake up time.
I think that's normal. So you're a normal person. But I do like to get up, and if I see it's good for astronomy, I'll hop out and do some or even drive somewhere. But the way that this works is that it will be highest while the sky is getting bright. So, for example, all you need to do is to figure out, and I think you have a pretty good spot for making these observations, because I think as long as you go out just around sunrise, so you don't have to worry about getting up too early. I think it would be like 5 or so for you. Then what you could do is spot Venus, and then you can kind of make some observations of Venus before the sun, sort of comes up behind any buildings that are in behind your place or whatever. I think there's some houses or something just to your east. So you actually could take advantage of this. That will probably be sort of more into the mid to end of July timeframe for you to be up and making those observations. So yeah, you don't have to get up too early, and you can observe it in a bright sky. Just the business of finding it before it gets the sky gets too bright to make it difficult to find. But you can see it just right before sunrise. So figure out whatever sunrise is, and then you can start there.
Right on.
All right. So let's see. I think this is sort of like a novel approach for us. I actually sent you a copy of the notes for this podcast.
Yeah, wow, this is really structured. We have rigor for this one. Wow.
I was like, wow, I better be organized. But so one thing you can see is on the right side, I've included an image of the Observer's Handbook for all the June events, and that's what these are based on. And these are basically the sky events for the month. And in the Observer's Handbook, which is a handbook for astronomical observations that's put out annually, it's an annual publication by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. It's available through Sky and Telescope and other online retailers. And it's a physical book, which is great. You can just throw it in the car and take it with you. And then it sort of lists all the, more or less, it's the planetary happenings night to night, not as much with the deep sky, of course. So that's where we're starting. So June 1st, that's going to be, well, tomorrow for us, and maybe this podcast will make it out by tomorrow, but that's going to be the best night to observe Mercury. And we really just have a very few nights to observe Mercury as it's at its greatest eastern elongation, meaning that it's visible in the evening skies here. And it's going to rise to about 24 degrees away from the sun. So just at sunset, it's going to be about 2.5 above the horizon, if people can recall the sky measurements. So have you ever observed Mercury before?
Not through a telescope. I've observed it a number of times naked eye.
Mm. So Mercury is one of those sort of like a, well, it's an interior planet, so inside of Earth's orbit, and because of that, um, like with Venus, it sticks very close to the sun, and Mercury is even closer to the sun than Venus is. So we only have a very few short days, every one of its orbits to actually see it in our skies, and it's always going to be just either right around sunset or just right around sunrise that you're able to view it. In fact, it can be a little challenging to see here. Not so much. Like, you will really want to see Mercury, just find that date, hope it's clear, go out into the open prairie, look in the right direction, and boom, you're going to make your observation. It's not too bad. It's
For
actually
sure.
quite magical to do that here. Out east where I'm from, not so much. You got a rock or a tree or a little hill in the way, and that can really scuttle your plans. It really doesn't take much to get something that's up there. It is so challenging to observe. You just need to make sure that you're lined up in the right direction. That I believe the myth or legend is, maybe it's not a myth, but more of a legend. I don't know if it's true or not. Is that the great astronomer Copernicus actually never saw Mercury? That's
Oh,
sort of
really? That's
yeah.
interesting. The
So
first time I
this
actually saw it was quite close to Venus. This was a number of years ago.
okay.
And Venus is what stood out because of how bright it was. And then as I was just naked eye observing Venus, I noticed Mercury was almost right beside it, which was kind of a neat thing.
Well, that's an excellent observation. Like, good for you to actually make that observation, then, because lots of other people wouldn't have made that. So that's good. I have observed it through a telescope. Boy, if there was any planet not to write home about, uh, boy, it is. Yeah, it's not so great. And the reason is that because it never rises very high above our horizon, it's going to be very orangish, and it's, even though the planets typically aren't as affected as a star is, as far as like the twinkling is concerned, it's so low that it twinkles, and it's so low that even though Mercury really looks like the moon, it's almost like a cousin of our moon, at least in appearance anyway. It's a gray cratered surface, but it's so low that little ball, that little planet on our horizon, is going to look orange. And the reason is, it's just like when our moon is like the harvest moon, when it's rising in the fall, or another time of year when it has this like long rise phase where it's very oblique, or if there's any kind of haze in the atmosphere, you really see it as orange. Well, Mercury is so far down, and its angle is such that typically you almost always see it as that orange color. And through a telescope, when it's close to the horizon like that, you really can't see it very well, of course. And one thing I hope to do is kind of get a situation set up where I'm able to observe it as it's passing overhead. So that's sort of the long-term plan for me this year, is to finally get that kind of setup going, and I've got a bit of a plan on the go for that. So
Oh, neat. So like daytime observation of Mercury is your goal?
yeah. So when what I plan to do is just be able to set up the scope, and then as the sun goes behind the house, then I know that it's I'm not going to get a view of the sun accidentally. And of course, that's always the danger here when we talk about interior planets like Mercury and Venus, is that you got to be careful not to accidentally view the sun. Of course, any view through a telescope of the sun will cause permanent and irreparable eye damage immediately. So you have to be careful for that. But once the sun is below sort of my immediate horizon, meaning that the sun's gone below the house, then I can kind of trail after it with the telescope. And then, my telescope is very small. I mean, it only weighs 5.5 pounds. So I can kind of sort of just keep moving it back through the yard, until I'm kind of, right beside the back fence. So I should be able to view it for maybe like 3 or 4 hours in an afternoon.
Oh,
So
wow.
something I've always kind of wanted to set up. I've got a pretty good situation. I think you're actually similarly aligned, so to speak, with the with the grid of our town. So even though we live in opposite ends of the town, you could probably do about the same.
Yep.
All right, so let's see. On Mercury, you're not going to see anything unless it's up overhead, and even then, it's going to be pretty dusky to see. But just to sight it, right now is a great time to go out right at sunset. Wait till that sun goes down, and then Mercury will be visible for almost 40 minutes. I think here in Saskatchewan, the actual altitude is just 10 degrees. So that's only one fist above the horizon. So it's not even really going to be, and of course, we're in perpetual twilight now here in Regina, and so it's not even going to be dark here. But you're going to look to the west, northwest, and then that's kind of where you're going to see it in the same general area that Venus was sitting recently. So that's kind of the same general area to look.
Perfect. I'll hopefully
Are you going to go out and try to view it?
well, the forecast is looking a little questionable for tomorrow night, and I think we're supposed to continue with these gale force winds. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
yeah. In the other podcast that we were kind of set to do today, I was going to talk about astronomical seeing a little bit with you as a little bit of a joke, because we really haven't even been able to do any astronomy this week because it's been so darn windy.
Yeah, it's been terrible.
So June 3rd, moving on from
Okay.
Mercury, on June 3rd, Venus is going to be at inferior conjunction. So do you remember what you were doing about 8 years ago this past week or this week?
Nope, I don't.
You
Was that the transit of Venus?
That was the transit of Venus.
Well, I was in Banff, where it poured rain the whole time.
Yes, I remember you didn't observe with me.
Yeah.
I was here in Regina and had clear skies, and Randall Rosenfeld came down or came up from Ontario. He stayed with me, and we went and did some other observing, and so we had a nice view of the transit of Venus. And the transit of Venus is when Venus crosses the sun, and that only happens the last time before that was in 1882, the year that Regina was founded. And so the next time was in I think it was I think it was
2013? No,
it was
that's not right.
2012, but then it was 8 years prior to that.
Oh, right.
So it was like 2004, I guess. So, but here's what I'm going to do. And see, I've gone and edited this because
Uh-oh.
I don't want to give you all my little things that I'm going to throw at you, right? I got to make this
Okay.
a bit of a surprise. So I'm going to give you a challenge this week.
Okay.
So you have that really nice hydrogen alpha telescope. We talked about that in one of the more recent episodes.
That's right.
So check this out. And I ran this in my planetarium software that between 11:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., and this would be only for people with very specialized solar observing equipment. Do not look at the sun if you do not have one of these really expensive and fancy hydrogen alpha telescopes like Shane has, and I do not. Venus is going to be only 12 arc minutes away from the sun. So this is very close, okay? Now, during the transit of Venus, when Venus was this close, I was able to use a telescope, I think identical to yours, if not slightly inferior, that another club member had, and I was actually able to observe Venus when it was that close.
Through the hydrogen
So,
alpha.
through a hydrogen alpha telescope. So
Hmm.
Shane, I think between 11:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. this June 3rd, I think that's Wednesday,
Yeah.
I think you could go out and try to observe Venus. That would be phenomenal. If you did that, I think that that would be the first time anybody has ever done that.
Hmm.
That would be quite a feat.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll put it in the calendar. I think our weather forecast for Wednesday is looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, right around
Um,
lunch, so you don't
yeah.
have to take any time off work.
No, this is well, and still working from home this week, so
As
uh,
I,
it the convenience factor is high. I will give it a try if it's clear.
yeah, I would so look forward to hearing your observations, and if you can even do like a bad sketch. I do lots of bad sketching, so maybe I can inspire you to do it as well. But the neat part is with this is I kind of had heard that it would be that close, and I didn't really think much of it because I thought, as often is the case with astronomy events, I thought this might be very transient, like very short lived. But this lasts for a really really long time. So that whole 2 hour period, um, I think it varies between like 12 and a half and 14 hours. Like it is close enough during a significant amount of that time. You know, I think you could have success. And if not, you can view the sun and report back on.
Yeah, one way or another, I'll have an observation to report.
Cool. Good stuff. All right. So then the next step, there's a lot, excuse me, going on at the very start of this month. So on June 4th, that's when Mercury is actually at its greatest elongation east. But the best time to view it, of course, is tomorrow night. Then on June 5th, the moon will be in a penumbral lunar eclipse. So do you know what a penumbral is? Lunar eclipse?
Oh, I always forget the definition of penumbral, and what's the other one? Um, sorry.
Basically you can't see the penumbral, so it's when it's going in the sort of the outer reaches of the shadow of the moon,
Uh,
and then when it's going through like a total one like that we're going to actually see, that's when it's going through the umbra.
right,
That's the
umbra and penumbra.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this one's just going through the outside. And I've seen people take photos of these penumbral eclipses before, so that's cool. As far as I know, it's not really a visual event. Like I've tried to see them before, and maybe you can kind of see it dimming down. It kind of looks maybe like a very light cloud is passing in front of the moon. So, I mean, if you happen to have really good skies and maybe a lot of people are bored out there with all the still pandemic lockdowns in place, that could be interesting. But if people take photos of it, you will see some dimming on that lunar surface on the evening, and it goes on for some hours. So but like I said, like I can't even run it in my software, really give more details than that because I'm visual. It's not really visual. So it's not something I would personally look for. So let's see. Moon and planet pairings. So we have a whole bunch of moon and planet pairings this month. It's going to be really, really nice. So, but they're all morning events for you, Shane. So it's kind of unfortunate.
Well, geez, I guess I have to change my lifestyle.
So the planets, let's see, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, then Neptune. They're going to pair with the moon this month. And then Saturn and Jupiter, they're never far apart, being just 5 to 6 degrees apart all month. While Mars and Neptune, they get as close as I think 1.7 degrees. So on
Wow.
June 8th, yeah, they're going to be super close. So the actual challenge I was originally going to give you, because I thought every month I'm going to give Shane a challenge, and maybe if it doesn't work out, or I mean this one is actually a more accomplishable feat perhaps than trying to make an observation of Venus like I've laid out for you. But you can actually see all the planets, all the main planets this month, are currently the classified 8. So on June 8th and 9th, Jupiter, so that's one, is going to be 2 degrees north of the moon. Then the next morning, Saturn, so that's 2 planets, will be 3 degrees north of the moon. So it's going to be one of those situations again where you can take a really wide field pair of binoculars, like a 9 or 10 degree. In fact, really old binoculars, often like I have a brand from Sears that are at my parents' place, and they have this like 10 or 12 degree field of view. It's huge. Those are like ideal for doing this. So that's Jupiter and Saturn. They're going to be close to the moon on June 8th and 9th. Then on the 12th, we're going to have Mars just 1.7 degrees south of Neptune. So Mars being the third one, Neptune being the fourth one, you can get lots of observations in. So on June 12th, Mars also reaches 10 arc minutes. So that's going to make it large enough to begin to see clearly. Lots of details such as Syrtis Major and maybe a south polar cap or something like that. So then on the 13th, Mars is going to be 3 degrees north of the moon. So Mars and Neptune are still going to be really close. So you're going to have Mars 3 degrees north of the moon. And then, of course, Neptune very, very close to Mars as well. So that's going to give you, so far we're at Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Neptune on the 17th. This one, I think, is pretty tough. I don't know if this is actually really a possible observation, but you can see Uranus 4 degrees north of the moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we've also talked about Mercury at the start. So that's 7. And then towards the end of the month, you're actually going to have Venus begin to be visible in the morning sky, like right at the very end of the month, the last few days. So you can get up early and just after, or just before sunrise. If you look to the east, you'll see Venus. So also, sorry, Shane, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's pretty neat. And just for context, when we're talking, 1.7 degrees to 3 degrees to 4 degrees, that's all visible within one telescopic field of view, depending on your telescope style. But man, that is really cool to be able to see multiple planets in one field of view through a telescope. I think you've convinced me to wake up.
Yeah, this month, this is going to be the month to wake up and to go out and take a look at these. Like, just take a look in your astronomy software. Like, for example, I'm not sure what you get with your 76 and a 24 panoptic. What's your max field of view? Like 3.5 degrees or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, about 3.5, I believe.
So, and you still have your 61, do you?
I still have the 61. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. I would maybe use the 61 because you're going for the grand total here versus like you're just trying to see this stuff versus making observations maybe. But whatever works for you. But that Jupiter 2 degrees north of the moon, and then Saturn 3 degrees north of the moon, with them being 5 or 6 degrees apart. And I think with your 31 Nagler in that little scope, you should have somewhere around a 6.5 degree field of view. I would imagine.
Yeah, it's quite large. So it's right around
So
there.
yeah, you should be able to just fit the two planets in. Otherwise, they'll just be really close. And then on those other mornings, you should be able to get like the moon and Jupiter, and then the moon and Saturn. That would be super cool on the 8th to be able to see that.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then the following night to be able to see Mars and Neptune. I think that would be possible. And then Mars and the moon on the 13th, and then Uranus and the moon on the 17th. That's going to be tough, and it's 4 degrees apart. So I think definitely using your William optics for that one, and that's going to be fairly far down in the eastern sky in the morning. So I don't know. That's right about solstice. Not a lot of dark. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that one with Uranus is going to be pretty tough. The others are going to be good though. But if you don't try it, you won't know.
that's right.
On June 20th, we have our solstice. Nothing to see there. I don't like putting
No.
things in which aren't actual observable events. I guess maybe if you did like some sort of ancient Greek staff in a hole and then traced out the line, or if you got into a bottom of a well somewhere, you might be able to make some sort of observational or scientific practice. But yeah, no, it's not really something that you can see. And of course, our night here will be just a few short hours long, and not very dark at all anyway. So, and then on the 21st, there's actually an annual solar eclipse for Central Africa, and that includes the Central African Republic, Congo, Ethiopia, and stretches through south of Pakistan into northern India and China. And of course, new moon occurs on that day as well. But with the annular solar eclipse, again, you always have to use safe solar viewing practices like one of these hydrogen alpha telescopes like you use. You cannot look at the sun with the unaided eye. And this is not one of those eclipses that you can ever view without any a protection. So you must wear protection at all times in order to view this one, because the sun will not be completely covered by the moon. Of course, it's going to leave this big halo of sun around it, and of course, any little bit of sun can and will damage your vision. So that's kind of the story on that. So
Don't annular eclipses, like every time there's a total eclipse the following year there's an annular? Is that how that works? There's some sort of connection between the two. Do you know?
yeah, that's my understanding. I really don't know. I mean, you know more about eclipses than I do. You've seen 10 times as many. So I've only, I've only seen partials. You're the only one out of us that's seen the totals, just for lack of proximity to where we live. And I'm also a deep sky observer, so more into that than the sun. But yeah, that's my understanding. My understanding is that that's kind of the cadence of it. That one year you get one, and the next year you get another.
Yeah.
We also have some shadow transits coming up on Jupiter. Now, I looked at these, but they're not really visible from North America. So this is going to take place on the 4th, 11th, and 18th. And what happens is you're going to have some of the moons transiting Jupiter. So what is a transit? Have you seen a transit of a moon on Jupiter before, Shane?
Oh yeah, many times. So a transit is when, well, typically the one of the four Galilean moons, which are the four brightest moons around Jupiter, when they travel across the face of Jupiter. Now we often lose sight of the moon just because of how bright Jupiter is, but the moon will cast a little black shadow on the surface of Jupiter, which is really fun to observe.
Yeah, so these are going to happen on the 4th at 11:20 Universal Time, on the 11th at 2:30 p.m. Universal Time, 14:30, and on the 18th at 18:30 Universal Time. So unfortunately, those don't work well for us here. West Coast of North America, maybe that last one. But other people in other parts of the world, like over China, different places, I think they're all visible from China. So that would be cool if anybody is out there listening, and go take a look at those. But yeah, so I was the first time I ever observed one. I had one of those really inexpensive 80 millimeter achromats, and I was observing Jupiter. And my cousin, this was on like Christmas Eve or Christmas Eve or something like that. And my cousin was coming up to spend Christmas with us, and drove in the driveway and got out of his car. He's like, "Oh, cool! You're looking through one of your telescopes," and walks over and looks in. He goes, "What's the black dot?" And I hadn't actually noticed it. I was like,
Oh
"Black
wow.
dot." And so I relooked. Oh my gosh, it's one of the transits, which I was kind of waiting for, but I can't remember. It may have been such that he pulled up and we chatted for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something, and then when we walked back over and looked in, the shadow had come onto the disc, right, or something to that effect. But we could really see it then. It was a lot of fun, and that was like $100 telescope, and I have another one of these $100 telescopes that I'm hoping you can take a look at here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, they to observe any of these shadow transits on Jupiter, you certainly do need a telescope. I don't think well, I guess large binoculars would probably show it, but a telescope would almost be required. And if you do decide to observe this and you're not seeing it at first, just give it some time. Like the actual shadow is quite small, and it may take you a couple minutes to locate it. But once you see it, you can't not see it after that. It becomes very apparent.
Sounds good, Shane.
Yeah. Um, I've added some things to the list, Chris. Because it is perpetual twilight, we don't go to dark skies to observe galaxies or nebula or anything of that nature, but you can still do some double star observing even in perpetual twilight, and you can do it from the city. Light pollution doesn't necessarily affect it, and there's a few interesting double stars that are starting to rise in the east that are always fun to look at. And then there's a couple in well, there's one in, or no, there's a couple in Virgo here that I want to take a look at.
Okay.
Um, so, rising in the east, maybe I'll start off with a little bit of a challenging one, and that's
So
the
can I
double.
can I just like hop in and just ask a really basic question first?
Absolutely.
So what is a double star and why should you look at them?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So a double star is it really means a multiple star system. The majority of the stars in the sky are not individual stars isolated, but they're actually part of a multiple star system, and they usually orbit around each other. And there's oftentimes more than just one star within the system. There can be two, three, four, five, six, and beyond, and they all kind of interact upon each other. Um, what makes these interesting? Well, there's a number of reasons that make these interesting. Sometimes that orbital period is so frequent that it actually changes the brightness of the stars. And they are known as variable stars when that happens. But also sometimes there's different colored stars that are paired together. Sometimes they form very interesting arrangements. There's a number of reasons to look at them, and I find them kind of fascinating. They also can test your optics too, an awful lot, depending on how close they are, and also depending on the difference in magnitude or how bright each star is. If you have a real bright one beside a real dim one, sometimes that can prove to be very challenging, depending on seeing conditions in your optics.
I remember reading in Burnham's Celestial Handbook, which, although it's somewhat out of print, I guess, and maybe quite a bit out of date, being written several decades ago now, still makes an excellent resource. But I remember in that it would have all these diagrams showing the orbits of all these stars. And if you kind of make your observations long enough, you could basically trace out the orbit of one of these stars around another.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a field of astronomy where amateur astronomers can make real contributions to the science of astronomy. A number of these double stars, they really don't get measured or observed by professional observatories, and there's a number of these systems that require some ongoing measurement in order to validate their orbital periods, their separation angles. There's all sorts of scientific data associated with these things that if an amateur was really, I guess, kind of determined or ambitious and enjoyed double star observing, you can actually record a lot of data and submit it to, I think it's the WDS, the Washington, what is it, Washington Double Star Society or something like that. I'm not sure
Oh, cool.
what the acronym is, but um, I'm not at that level. I'm not. I just like looking at them. I'm not into recording all of the data that goes with them.
Yeah. So what ones do you have for us this month?
Well, rising in the east is Cygnus, which is a very prominent summer constellation in the heart of the Milky Way. It forms a cross, or the prominent stars in the constellation form a cross. And if you go to the very bottom tip of the cross, there's a star called Alberio. And this one is kind of interesting. It does not actually meet the definition of what a double star is, a system of stars interacting upon each other. This is just a visual double. They're actually not at all associated. But what makes these really neat to look at is one is kind of an orangey star, and then the other one is a blue star. And to have them so close together, when you see the color contrast, it really jumps out at you. And it's a very pretty double. I look at it multiple times throughout the year. It's easy to find, and really telescopes of any aperture can split this and show those colors quite well. I'm sure you've looked
Oh,
at it a number of times.
yeah. Yeah. I've looked at it a fair bit.
Yeah. And then in Virgo, there's a couple that I'll point out. One is I think it might even be the alpha star in Virgo, Porama. Do you know if that's alpha?
Rima.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly matched pair. So it's just two identical white stars beside each other, same magnitudes, and fairly easy to split in most telescopes. And then in Virgo, it's known as Struve 1740. It's two yellow stars beside each other. So again, you get some color, which you don't always see in the stars. And then moving into a couple of more challenging doubles, close to Cygnus, Lyra, the constellation of Lyra is also rising. And there's a very famous double star called the Double Double. And Have you ever looked at that one, Chris?
Yep.
Yep. So it's at first you might just see two prominent stars that are fairly close, but very easy to split. Even binoculars will split them. But those two prominent stars are actually both pairs of doubles. And if you increase your magnification or if you have a good night of seeing, it becomes very easy to split those two. So that's why it's called the double double. But it is also a good test for seeing. If you're unable to split those two closer ones, you know that it might not that the atmospheric conditions might not be that great that night.
Cool. Hey,
And
so
the,
when you magnification, what sort of magnifications are we talking about here, and what size telescope would you need to be making these observations?
well, the first three, really a 60 millimeter telescope will probably get you, or will allow you to split those. Um, Magnification, that's a good question. I find often with double stars, in order for me to split them, I have to use 100 to 150 times, depending on how close they are. But once I split them and I locate the companion star, if I back off the magnification, I can still see it. It's for me, sometimes it's just a matter of locating the position of the companion star, and then magnification isn't, or as much magnification is no longer required.
Okay.
But it all depends on how close they are, and then the magnitudes of the stars that'll dictate what magnification you'll need to use.
Hmm. And for finding these, a good resource. I think you have a copy of the Cambridge Double Star Atlas, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good resource for people. Like, we're not going to put up charts and maps and all that. We used to do that before, and it's a massive amount of work. Um, I think recommending good resources is probably better. But would you recommend the Cambridge Double Star Atlas?
Oh, 100%. It's fantastic. It has, oh gee, I don't know how many double stars plotted, but that's the focus of that atlas. Although it does show you a lot of other things in the star charts. But if you're wanting to take on some double star observing, that's a must-have. And I think it's readily available. And I think it's, what is it, maybe $30 to $40?
Yeah, it's well worth the price, and I believe it also has like deep sky objects and everything. I think you were just using it as a regular chart for a long time.
Yep, yeah, I was. And what's kind of neat too, the author, I think he highlights around 100 prominent double stars.
Oh wow,
Um, so, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes to look at a list of a couple thousand double stars, but when you just focus in on the asterisk ones, which are the kind of the showpiece double systems, those that makes it a lot easier for you.
sounds good.
Yeah. And that's about all I have here, sir. How about you? Anything else for
Well,
June?
for June, like right now, I'm just still doing some observation write ups. So for me, with the perpetual twilight, I hope to be getting up and making these planet and moon observations. That's really what I have on my agenda, and then to really begin making some Mars observations once we get another week or so under our belts here. That's what I'm looking forward to. But yeah, other than that, I think we should wrap it up.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll see you all another time.
Thank you.